Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as we continue to talk some MLB. We just talked about the Boston Red Sox re-signing manager Alex Cora to a new 3-year contract extension. So for Red Sox fans, I'm sure the day started very positive overall, but things got ugly really quick because in the rubber match, Game 3 of that series against the Rockies, the Red Sox got their teeth kicked in, losing 20 to 7. It was 20 to 3 up until that 8th inning. So the Sox were able to put in a couple garbage time runs, you could say, but it was another very disappointing series loss and one that feels like got away from them. You go back to Game 1 where it almost seemed like at that point it just wasn't really written in the stars for the Red Sox to be able to pull out this series where, it should have been. If you look at it ultimately, the Red Sox cruised in Game 2 with a 6-0 win, and ultimately we saw the fact that, in Colorado, they could have gotten themselves right and they would have continued to play through the game and be able to, come away strong. But Game 3, like I mentioned, was just an absolute disaster. And we saw Nick Pivetta, who I know going into the game had an ERA above 14 against the Rockies in his career. He had really struggled in Colorado his first couple appearances, and this was maybe the worst starting performance I have ever seen from Nick Pivetta. It's probably the worst Red Sox game period I have seen from them, where Pivetta goes 2 2/3 innings, 10 hits, 8 runs, 6 strikeouts, and allowed 2 home runs. Now, sure, he got very little help from his defense, which is part of why it was such a disastrous game for the Red Sox, because every aspect of what they were doing was not playing out for them well. The pitching wasn't there. The defense behind him was also really bad. Rafaela dropping a ball in center field, Jarren Duran not being able to, actually pick up a ball and try and throw someone out at home. It was just ugly all around. Jamie Westbrook as well committing an error. The Red Sox ultimately, at the end of this game, they're listed with 4. It probably should have been 5 because I think they reversed the Rafaela call at one point, but it was just such an ugly, ugly game. And yeah, Pivetta's ERA now against the Rockies is now up to 15.51 in his 5 starts. Really, really ugly stuff there. And for the Red Sox, again, the vibes were really high coming into the All-Star break where they were holding on to that final wild card spot, and it seemed like they were building up some momentum. They had their best record of the season, and since there, it's 2 straight series losses and losing 5 out of 6 games. The Dodgers series is one thing where it is the Dodgers. Now, I talked about this before. They should have won a couple of those games. Games 1 and 2, they both let slip out of their hands at the very end. The lack of being able to drive guys in with runners in scoring position was a massive problem for them in that series. The Dodgers at that point, yes, they're the Dodgers, but they were dealing with a lot of injuries themselves, especially to their pitching staff, and that seemed like it could have been a big statement series. They dropped that one. Ultimately, you feel bad that they didn't get a game, and that they probably had a couple that they let get away from them. It is still the Dodgers, though, which is just sort of a blanket statement that hides up all of the rest of the ugliness that took place there, but it's something that you can at least sort of bank on a little bit. But this series against the Rockies, there is very little excuse, and I think that it more than anything just kind of points to one of the biggest issues with the Red Sox is the fact that they absolutely need help in the bullpen. We saw, granted, Kenley Jansen was not available for this series. He's had a number of problems in Colorado throughout the course of his career with his heart, so ultimately he wasn't able to travel for this series, and even if he was there, I mean, there's just not enough go-to arms coming out of the bullpen, where last year we saw when the Red Sox were flirting with being competitive, they had Chris Martin in the 8th inning, and then they had Kenley Jansen in the 9th, and they were pretty shut down for the most part. And Martin has been injured for the majority of this year. When he's been playing, he has not been the same level of himself, so it has been a little bit of a mess there. And obviously pitching in Colorado, no matter what, is difficult anyways, but it was very, you go through the list of bullpen arms that they have, and there are very few of them that you actually feel good about. Now, Slayton, also currently on the IL, that's somebody you can kind of talk yourself into. Was really good at the beginning of the year. Had his bumps during the middle portion, but at least now, again, he's probably your second best bullpen arm. Starting rotation, now they have Giolito that is maybe going to be able to return this year. Even if he does, I'm not sure what type of expectations that you can fairly have for him. So I wouldn't put any stock in that. It would be very Red Sox for them to say, well, he's eventually going to come. So that's almost like a trade deadline acquisition in its own, but I'm not sure about that. Ultimately, Cooper Criswell actually had a really good start for them in Game 2. And he's put together a couple pretty good starts that you can't complain about all too much. That being said, feels like, you should ideally have your top-end starters in having Tanner Houck, whatever version of Brian Bayo you can get. And I guess it's Pivetta, but like I just mentioned, I mean, that's not super encouraging for the most part for the Red Sox of having depth to actually be able to go out and have a solid rotation for you. So they're going to need to address that. Like I mentioned before, they struggle against left-handed pitchers, so they need to go and get a right-handed bat. The name that's been most tied to them up to this point has been Luis Rengifo of the Los Angeles Angels. So, we will see there, but ultimately just a very ugly start coming out of this second half of the season, and the magic might be over a little bit with the Red Sox. At this point, Fangraphs now has them with just a 36% chance to make the playoffs. That was number that was over 50% ahead of the All-Star break. So things have been falling apart quickly for them, and I'm not really sure how they can necessarily talk themselves back into it. Again, it sounds like with Breslow that he was making some comments amidst the Cora extension that they are expecting to be improving the team at the trade deadline this year. We'll see what that means, because improve can be a pretty broad term there. Now, again, he specifically referenced the injuries to the pitching department, which is something that would be a great addition for them. And, even if it is marginal, could still be enough to at least get the Red Sox back to that, and a bat would be, things you could feel a lot better about the Red Sox moving forward here. But even still, I mean, I just talked about it, though, with the Yankees a couple segments ago. I think that the American League is pretty open, and if you make the dance, you can find a way to, potentially go on a run here. The teams that are ahead of them really don't seem like world beaters, where you look at the Kansas City Royals, who the Red Sox just beat in a series prior to the All-Star break. It was their last series then, and the Minnesota Twins. And I think that the Red Sox can be competitive with either one of those teams, and seems like, especially with how the Red Sox have been running the past couple of years, very analytics driven, maybe they look at that 36% chance to make the playoffs and they say this isn't the year. But it also is a little bit of a representation of there are some very clear needs for the Red Sox, and these past couple series have highlighted them. So instead of using it as an excuse to not buy into it, how about you actually just go address those needs and see what can happen? Because this Red Sox team was surging for a while, and obviously it's a long season, and maybe it was an outlier during that period of time, but I'm also not really sure. I feel like there is a great chance that they could at least be in competitive for that final wild card spot, and that's what I expect them to do down the stretch of the season. But let me know what you think. We are now going to be taking our final break of the show, and when we come back on the other side, we're going to be shifting gears to the NFL, where I am going to be giving a season preview for the Houston Texans as we go through all 32 teams. Today we are kicking off the AFC South with Houston, so we will be diving into that. But first, a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back.